He's a professor of education in the University of Texas, Austin, Texas. Dr. Maxwell has earned his Bachelor of Science degree in Science Education, Physical Sciences, at Oregon State University, and his Master and Doctorate are from Harvard University. His research and publications over the last 25 years have been focused on intelligence and thinking, skill development in young children. His and his students' findings have been published in learned journals in Korea, France, England, Fiji, and in the United States. His two most recent books are Thinking, The Expanding Frontier, published in 1983, and the other book is 52 Ways to Raise the IQ of a Child, published in 1985. Dr. Maxwell serves as the chairman of the executive committee for the Conference on Thinking, a conference which he originated at the University of South Pacific. He's also member of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States. The title of his presentation is different to the one you have in your program. The title is The Human Brain as a Model for Decision Making. In his presentation, he will explore how the brain receives, processes information, and proceeds with its work. Please help me in welcoming Dr. William Maxwell.
Ooh. In the Baha'i faith, you have to learn how to straddle both worlds. All at the same time, yes. Members of the Association for Baha'i Studies, distinguished knights of Baha'u'llah and other pioneers, teachers, students, scholars, future scholars, and everybody. It is a great honor for me to be at your 10th anniversary convention and to join you in celebrating your emergence from childhood, if I may refer to Piaget, and help you to get ready for your entry into adolescence and the challenges of maturity. As we were being driven from the airport yesterday, Marilyn Green and I thought, what a beautiful place to celebrate a 10th anniversary. Could you imagine any more beautiful a place, any more appropriate place to remember that you are growing and maturing? So on behalf of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States, I should like to present a birthday present to the Association for Baha'i Studies, a modest token check, which we hope will symbolize the fact that our assembly, your sister assembly, sees this association as its nephew or niece, as the case might be, and wishes to token that by a token of money. So, the only way to outdo Vancouver is to have your 25th convention following the lesser peace in Haifa. This is a feast, probably the most bountiful and beautiful feast to be held anywhere on this planet this year, because it is a balanced diet of the spiritual, the intellectual, and according to the medical people, the very practical. So again, what an honor it is to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me. Albert Einstein used to play games. In fact, all of his discoveries derive from his playing games. He called them Gedankenspiele. One of the Gedankenspiele that Einstein used to play reflected his absolute belief that on every atom, on every molecule, on every organism, on every living or material thing, on the cosmos itself, was a clock. And once that organism or that atom or that ion came into existence, the clock began running. And everything had a given time in which at the end of the time limit, it disappeared. It ended its existence. Attached to every atom, this clock ran forward until that thing approached the speed of light, in which the clock stopped. So he played that game. How long can I keep this atom in existence? Well, the oldest and longest running thing that we know of is the cosmos, which has a lifespan of 40 billion years, if you wish to count, approximately. But even in that 40 billion years, it has time to spawn 3 or 4 generations of solar systems and galaxies and our Earth. But the fact is that everything in the universe that we know of, say what the Hindus call the changeless one, expires. And Baha'u'llah speaks of the expiration of all things in the Kitab-i-Iqan. And that which today most manifestly has expired are the civilizations of the world, each one of which is manifesting its death in different ways. And beneath that level of generalization, every institution, save the family, has expired. The institution of the medical profession has betrayed its trust and is expired. Although, your driver's license runs out on 31 December, you can drive on the 1st of January if you want to, but your license is expired. The legal profession has betrayed its trust, and it too has expired. And my profession, the profession of education, has expired. All are based upon that which has expired. So today, I wish to invite you to go back into the right brain, the right hemisphere of our brains, where man has spent most of his evolution, and to see in that right brain if we can find some metaphors on which we can construct a new epistemology, a new feeling, a new set of pictures that will guide us as we look forward to giving our children a true education for world peace. Join me as we go into the part of the brain where dogmas never existed, in the metaphor brain. Have you ever met a dogmatic musician? No. Musicians, by their very training, cannot be dogmatic, because if you like his fugue, fine. If you don't like his fugue, no one is going to force you to listen. Go and listen to somebody else's haiku, if you wish. Could we then have the first slide? The human brain, a model for decision-making about education and about organization. There are 4 premises to this lecture. One, the sharpening and the refining of the human brain And this, for the benefit of those not members of the Baha'i faith, comes from the penultimate chapter of the World Order of Baha'u'llah. The sharpening and refinement of the human brain is a worthy goal to engage our attention. This is the first religion that is consciously goal-oriented. Our goals are many. That particular goal that engages the education profession is the goal of refining and sharpening the human brain. A second premise, corollary to the first, is that religion must inspire scientific inquiry and science must support the religious sentiments. The best example comes not from our religion yet, because we haven't really produced Baha'i scientists yet, as we haven't produced Baha'i educationists yet. But the Jewish religion provides a model. Moses intuitively understood that it is the scavengers of the world that harbor in concentrated form the disease-carrying organisms. And therefore, he forbade to the Jews, and anybody else interested, the eating of the scavengers of the world. Now, the Jews knew that for 3,500 years, and they used to gather at Jericho and other places, just like you're gathering, to talk about the revelation of Moses. It never occurred to them to say, now, why did Moses forbid the eating of shrimp? What has shrimp got that makes it poisonous to the mind or body or spirit? Well, let's look. Well, Leeuwenhoek finally looked, but it took us 200 years to discover that in the shrimp and in other scavengers, there are all kinds of dirty organisms that are not very good for the body. Well, why didn't man ask that? What is it about us that prevents us from asking good questions? It is because often the left brain becomes dogmatic prematurely. But in the Baha'i faith, that protection is guaranteed, that we can never allow one brain or the other to dominate. A third premise, not on the thing, is let me state it rather in my own words. Another premise of this lecture is that according to Piaget, who dominates this period of human history in terms of looking at human growth and development, unless there is action, there is no learning. And therefore, you're not going to sit there passively and listen to Maxwell spew out his opinions. Rather, you're going to join him in dialogue. And I'm going to have some exercises for you as I proceed. Moreover, I ask you to reject any metaphor that I offer if you don't like it. The beauty of a metaphor is it is a gift or an offering, either way. The next part of the slide, please. Each age in man's evolution has its focus and, if you will, its locus. The locus and focus of the industrial era of the 19th and 20th centuries was not the farm, nor the factory, but rather the bureau, the office, from which we have the term bureaucracy. Even children's classroom workstations reflected this locus and this focus, the desk. We treated all school learners as if they were going to be clerical bureaucrats. And so we only trained, generally speaking, two of the human aptitudes. That is the verbal clerical arithmetic. There is much evidence that the locus and the focus for the modern era, the era we are now entering, and some might call it the cybernetic era, will be neither the farm, nor the factory, nor the office, but the human brain. And the way we educate our children might reflect this focus and this locus, as the human brain is the model for the cybernetic. Next slide, please. This doesn't take any evidence today. All societies are sick, and the sicknesses infect every individual. Every conference you go to, of whatever nature, this theme is sounded in one form or another. But let me use that, though, as an acknowledgement. Next slide, next part of the slide. But the point that is relevant to us is that of the living models for the ideal organizational behavior, the most familiar and the one that has informed the training of nearly all administrators in the world is the the Max Weber model, the bureaucratic model, sometimes called the rational model of human decision making. But this model now, by all the theorists in the field, is also acknowledged to be seriously defected, or in effect to have expired. One of the thinkers that reflects this is Steinbrunner. Let me just quote a few lines of his. From history, one gains an appreciation that established paradigms are neither lightly nor quickly displaced. Paradigms meaning models through which we see the universe, even by challengers of clear superiority. I had an uncle when I was a little boy who swore that the world was flat. He could not accept the round world paradigm. And I thought, how strange. What's wrong with this man? But he was reflecting what everybody, save Columbus and two or three others, thought 400 years ago. Steinbrunner then points out that the replacement for the bureaucratic or rational model is likely to come from interdisciplinary inquiries. And in brief, he suggests, because that's the title of his book, one of them will be the cybernetic alternative. Steinbrunner suggests then that when you really get fed up with the bureaucratic model, mankind might wish to take a glimpse at the cybernetic model. And just to help you get fed up with the bureaucratic model, let me give you 3 or 4 horror stories out of the bureaucrats' catalog of horrors. First of all, the bureaucrat thinks hierarchically. For example, Peters and Waterman in their book, In Search of Excellence, point out that in Japan there are 3 levels of decision making, and only 3. So that if a worker on the floor has a bright idea, he only has to sell it to 2 people. The guy in top of him and the next guy. And if it's a good idea, it is implemented. And 80% of all innovation in Japan come from the bottom. But in America, Peters and Waterman point out, not Maxwell, Peters and Waterman point out that in the Ford Corporation, there are 30 levels of hierarchy. So if by chance a lowly worker gets an idea, and mind you, the bureaucratic model discourages him from having a bright idea, but if by chance he gets one, he has 30 people to convince before it can be implemented. Now figure the odds. And we wonder, how come most of the cars on the highway are made overseas? Moreover, the bureaucratic model encourages irresponsibility. The bureaucratic model says if Danesh makes a bad decision, It's not his fault. Blame the system. Somebody else decided that, or it's written down somewhere. For example, the man responsible for the most atrocious slaughter in Vietnam, My Lai, has never spent one day in jail. Hitler, the epitome of Weber's bureaucrat, created all sorts of beautiful autobahns and autocrats, and Hitler is still, by the record of his religion, still a good Christian. There has never been a motion to excommunicate him. He is still a good Christian and a good bureaucrat because he built a marvelous machine. The bureaucracy believes in the codification of orthodoxy, and therefore the obverse is that it stifles creativity. It believes itself to be objective and rational, and therefore it fails to train the emotions. I read 4 or 5 of the current journals in my profession, and every month I see the articles dealing with learning math, how to learn history, how to teach science, how to give better images of whatever. And never since I've been back in the States, 18 months now, have I seen a single bit of research on how to train students to be honest. The bureaucratic model acknowledges no ethical value system. Did you read yesterday's New York Times, in which the largest corporation that bilged the American people of $2 billion has put out a 30-page handbook on ethics in this company, General Dynamics? How are you going to teach a 40-year-old man ethics if you haven't taught him in the previous 39? But more seriously, the bureaucratic model coming into its adulthood at the very time that Darwinism was establishing it itself, adapted one of the strangest aberrations of Darwinism, the theory of the survival of the fittest. The sort of the linchpin of the Spencer aspect of the Darwin theory of evolution, the survival of the fittest, became the linchpin of evolutionary theory as taught, became the linchpin of the bureaucratic theory. And thus, the sources then of the demise of bureaucracy was its very own undoing. It brought in from the jungle the laws of the jungle, dominance and submissiveness. And thus, the sources for the downfall of the bureaucracy will be the fruit of dominance is tyranny, and the fruit of tyranny is poverty. Baha'u'llah says so in the Kitab Igon. Thus, where there lives tyranny, there lives poverty, and where there is poverty, the bureaucrat thought he perished, but he shall be replaced. Thus, in search of an alternative model for the bureaucratic way of thinking, the way our schools are currently organized, I simply give you in outline form 4 of the basic flaws of it so that we can turn our attention briefly to the cybernetic model. Proposition 1. The human brain is a model for decision making. Let me speed through. Next slide, please. I'm going to suggest 9 propositions that will help us to see the brain metaphorically as providing another way of looking at how we educate our children to make decisions for themselves. That is, the great decisions. What are you going to believe? How are you going to earn your livelihood? Who are you going to share your life with? And what way are you going to serve the ongoing evolution of humanity? Those great decisions, we might use not the model from the jungle, but the model from the brain. And the first aspect of the brain, and for those of you who are in neuroscience, there's a beautiful issue of the Scientific American, September 1979, devoted entirely to the brain. And every one of these propositions derive from that journal, the Scientific American. It's an entire issue devoted to the brain. Last summer at this time, I was sharing the podium at Harvard with the chairman of the Department of Neurobiology at Yale, Dr. Charles F. Stevens. And in the audience, the people got upset at some of my metaphors. So they turned to Dr. Stevens, who was sitting on my right. "Is Maxwell right?" they asked. And he said, "Yes, I'd like to think that way." So that it is not my thoughts. These are gleanings from the most recent comprehensive study of the human brain in the journal, The Scientific American. Number one, and this is diametrically 180 degrees opposed to the current models of human organization. One, each neuron is relatively sovereign, independent, and is highly specialized. You see, what the school does, the typical public school, and they're only 200 years old, 1836 approximate till now, is to, in a sense, treat every child as if they were little carbon copies of each other and become generalists, because all clerks do the same thing. For example, in Nigeria and in Fiji, where we were, if you were the permanent secretary for works, public works, today, my good friend Sikivo, who was ambassador to the United Nations, and I'm sure that you remember him, Dr. Derujo, Semese Sikivu, ambassador from Fiji. He goes back to Fiji, becomes minister for health, then minister for works. The assumption is that if you're a good bureaucrat, you can do anything. And the British system follows this pattern slavishly. The brain says absolutely not. If you want to be a good violinist, you must start by the age of 3. And if you want to be a good violinist, forget the oboe. You can't be all things to all people. But this sovereignty, and Baha'u'llah anticipates this in the first 2 hidden words, that thine may be a sovereignty ancient, imperishable, and everlasting. In the brain, there are no whips. There are no slaves. There are no servants. I listened to South Africa. I read everything yesterday. Mr. Botha gleaned his model of the universe from 19th century bureaucratic Christianity, in which there are superior people, there are superior races, there are superior people who have a right to dominate others. In the human brain, dominance does not exist. I can quote you, if you wish, from the man who discovered this fact of how neurons share information. Let me go on to the next one. I won't bother you with the quote. Proposition number 2. The neurons form networks which share and, what's that word? Reinforce information. The currency of the brain is information. The economics of the brain is information. The information is shared via networks. And the corollary, let's go on to the next part of that slide. There are no secrets in the brain. This, friends, this alone is revolutionary to the bureaucrat who loves to stamp secret on everything. In Washington, there are papers which are stamped secret, which if you stack them one on the other would stretch from here to the moon and back. Baha'u'llah says, think not that what thou hast done in secret is not seen. We have engraved on tablets of chrysolite. In the universe of the brain and in the universe of the cosmos, there is no amnesia. There are no secrets. There is privacy, NSA members. There is privacy. The fact that you sleep with your wife, we all know, but we don't share that experience. It's not secret, it is private, and that's the difference. In the brain, there are no secrets, although occasionally there are private information. Next one. The second corollary to the fact that every neuron is sovereign is that there is no autocrat in the brain. The death of Western civilization, the death of our civilization, is because men unilaterally made decisions without proper consultation. The antidote to the autocrat is the great gift of Baha'u'llah, consultation. And the spirit of that gift was discovered not by the Baha'is, but by Chester I. Barnard in his lectures, The Functions of the Executive. No man knows all that he should know. And therefore, the wise executive in teaching our children prepares them for this, consults before making any decision. The corollary of there is no autocrat is the obligation of Baha'is to consult. For example, even medical matters, Baha'u'llah says, if you have any problem, consult the wisest possible person. Next. Now, this is the metaphor that I particularly like to demonstrate, and I'm going to demonstrate it unless you've gone to sleep with your left hemisphere. That is, work proceeds at a rate of 150 to 200 ion exchanges per second. Incidentally, see all those buttons around each neuron? Each of your neurons, and you have 100 billion of them, and if that figure doesn't make any sense, you can understand. If you started counting the number of neurons you have and counted one neuron every second, if you began at the time of Jesus, one neuron every second, every 60 every minute, 60 times 60 every hour, 24 times 60 times 60 every day, and you started counting the neurons in your head at the time of Jesus, you would only be 2/3 through now. That's how many neurons we have, each one of them so powerful that no computer chip anywhere can match them. But each neuron has 10,000, up to 10,000 buttons that communicate with other neurons, that connect. So each of those little buttons, 10,000 of them, of every neuron you got, not only exchanges information chemically, but also electrically. Well, that speed of thought, if you will, is 200 ion exchanges per second. Fast. Not quite the speed of light. Now, if you go into the back of the classroom, and I recommend this for all of us, because Baha'u'llah says the primary profession is education, we should find out what's going in school, sit in the back of the classroom, and notice how slowly teachers teach today. Generally speaking, in most classrooms of North America, they only teach one concept per day, per period. But in fact, in mathematics, we're discovering 1,400 concepts per year. So if we teach 200 concepts per year, and they're discovering 1,400 concepts per year, what's happening to the lowly child as time moves on? He's falling further and further behind. But in Japan, the teachers generally teach 2 or 3 concepts per period, and in Finland, at least 2 concepts. By concept, I mean, for example, the square root, something like that. Now, I want to exercise your little brains, my little brains, real quickly with some arithmetic, which all of you are good at, I am sure. Just to give you an idea of how we've got to change our method of exercising the child's mind, because if every neuron has to make a connection with every other neuron for the purposes we will talk about it toward the end, that means that the brain has to really be sharpened. And we are not doing it. 10,000 connections per second? Let me illustrate. I have a number, and if I subtract 2 from that number, I get 8. What number do I have? Thank you, that's right, 10. I have a number. If I multiply it by 3, I get 27. What number do I have? Thank you, 9 is right. I have a number. If I subtract 2 from it, add 2, add 5, I get 13. What number do I have? 8. Yes, somebody's bright. Very good. I have a number. I subtract 2. I divide that by 5. I get 1. I square that and I get 1. And I cube that and I get 1. What number did I start with? 7. You're right. Yes, very good. Another one. What did he say? Just when you thought you had it. I have a number. I multiply it by 3. I add 2 to that. Then I subtract 5 from that, and I get 36. What number do I have? 13. 13, you're right. Very good. Well, we exercise our children's minds in such a way that we've got to make them faster. And do you know what Abdu'l-Baha said? He said, you cannot teach children science through books. You've got to teach them through games. And the way that we make them do this is via games. We invent games. Einstein invented at least 200 scientific games. I won't have time, obviously, to go into it. Next slide, please. Proposition 6. Charles F. Stevens, who is professor and chairman of the Department of Neurobiology at Yale, in his article in the Scientific American, page 65, expressed this metaphor in this scientific way. Different types of chemically gated channels exhibit different selectivities. Some resemble the acetylcholine channel, which passes sodium and potassium ions with little selectivity. Others are highly selective. Such positive going voltage channels tend to open voltage-gated channels and to generate nerve impulses so that they are known as excitatory postsynaptic potentials. In effect, some neurons in the brains are specialized to excite the brain. The professor of motivational psychology at Harvard, Robert W. White, makes that point, that part of education is to make life exciting. Certain neurons excite the others, and therefore we mustn't be upset when our children, out of the corner of their eye, see dragons. Those dragons are real, metaphorically. They exist out there. And so this little neuron over here says, ooh, ooh, a dragon. And the other neurons turn and look and say, no, that's not a dragon, that's a technician. But it is those excitatory neurons which are not always truthful and which we must accept as Prometheus accepted. They're telling lies, but those lies may be alerting us to be alert. What happens if a dragon walks in that room? Well, we think about it and we discover an exit over here. Next slide. All information, both stored and incoming, is continuously under review, is reflected upon. Revision is the norm. That is, the changing of perceptions and interpretation is built into the cybernetic model. The brain is a reviser, and every night for 3 hours we all dream. And the dreams are reshuffling of images so that the images are looked upon anew and reflected upon new experiences and are rethought, regurgitated. And that is the beauty of the model that is 180 degrees opposite of the dogmatic Calvinistic model that has so influenced the civilization that we see dying about us. I'll give you a case from the Baha'i faith. It was dogma almost, promulgated by people like Horace Holly and lesser people like Bill Maxwell, that said the lesser peace will be developed by the politicians in the UN and elsewhere, and we Baha'is will have nothing to do with the lesser peace. That was the dogma. Horace Holly said it. I've heard other speakers say it, and I must have said it 1,000 times. The House of Justice is sending you a letter. He sent us a letter. The House of Justice on October 24th will send a letter to the world saying the lesser peace will come because you, the world, take a look at the Baha'i faith. And we Baha'is are going to be involved in the creation of the lesser peace. The brain revises all knowledge. So epistemologically, knowledge is evolutionary as the brain is cybernetic. Next slide. Metaphor number 8. Each cell acts as if the survival of the entire organism depended upon its vigilance and efficiency. There is a country, and I will not name it, in which you can get a university degree if you pass 40% in all your courses. Where? I will not tell you. So I asked my students, would you fly with a pilot who gets 40% on landing skills? The new education, of which we only glimpse, is the education of perfection. Error will be permitted. That is, we humans are the only species that does everything wrong the first time. My students in Fiji challenged this. They said, oh no. I said, well, name me anything that a human does right the first time. And they said, well, suck the mother's nipple. No. If you watch, the baby can't even do that right the first time. We humans, we're the only species that does it wrong every time the first time. We had Eden. And look what we did with it. But we'll try again. We're going to try the second time. And we're trying right now. And the House of Justice has said 1986 is the year to make the first step toward returning to Eden. Well, we're going to try it. But a prerequisite of that, the perfecting of the human behavior, is not to accept unvigilant behavior. Do you remember the case of 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania? Do you know that there were 23 stupid mistakes that precipitated that thing? We humans are trained to be sloppy and careless. Last Sunday, I was flying to Houston with the vice president from Texas Christian University in Fort Worth. And he and his wife and I were talking all the way from Chicago to Houston. The reason he went to Houston was it was cheaper. And then he was going back up to Fort Worth. Anyhow, the waitress was giving him his coffee, and she's talking to the next guy, and she promptly spills coffee over his $400 suit. She wasn't paying attention. This is now characteristic of the way Americans particularly, and other countries generally, behave in any kind of thing. And so we can see why atomic energy is premature, but not forbidden. It's coming. But first, we've got to begin in the schools of training students to train every neuron to be careful with everything we do. I know my time is running out. Quickly, real quick. Yes. I'm not going to take any more time. This is metaphor number 9. You see, it didn't take long. What is that one? Number 9. The interactions of the neurons is not on 1 to 6, as the theory books had it when I went to school, nor 1 to 24, as some theorists now suggest, but something on the order of 1 to 10,000. That is, for every human, in order to function at your maximum efficiency, we have got to develop a synaptic connection, which means an intimate, close connection. Love, if you wish, sharing information, if you wish, sharing perceptions, if you wish, agreeing to protect each other, agreeing to coach each other. When Dinesh makes a mistake, one of his synaptic buddies ought to say, Dinesh, that was a lousy letter you wrote from the NSA. Don't you think you ought to have said it better? You've got to tell him that straight to his face rather than behind his back. Well, in order... Out there, Dinesh, they're denying that you've ever made a mistake. You did it right the first time. When we know that we're coming toward maturity, we will know that we have something on the order of 10,000 close bonds with every kind of human neuron cell. It is in that far, far time. We are a long way from that now. If you look in most human brains, you not only see cancer, that is wild cells, you see jungle. Literally, not metaphorically, most human brains today are a jungle. Neither are they trained nor connected to anyone. Baha'u'llah says in the Kitab-i-Iqan that when he appeared in Iran, there were not 2 humans who were united. There were not 2 humans who were united. But the vision that science and religion and the arts presents to us is probably best captured by Schiller and Beethoven. Schiller wrote his poem, Ode to Joy, which Beethoven set to music. And Beethoven envisioned a great symphony of 9,000 pieces and 1,000 voices, singing in absolute harmony the brotherhood of man, harmonized in the absolute perfection of beauty, in which the oboe didn't say, I don't need that violin, because the oboe knew that the beauty of his music was only possible if the violin was finely tuned. And the violinist knew that his greatest work would only be appreciated by that divinity when every piece of the orchestra was finely tuned and trained to sing at last the Ode to Joy, the Ode to Peace. The model for that is embedded for 1,000,000 years in the human brain.